is consistent rationale for them. And when I look at Amosville, this little tiny map that doesn't have much in it, and the rest of the maps, like, what is the rationale behind these? It's just not clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Sharp. I'm here to speak just as an individual, but I do happen to be on the sewer authority. And I think I'm maybe the source of this 100 home assertions. I just want everybody to know that. But I think a couple of things have been said about the sewer system, and I don't want to get into the village boundaries or the development of Sperryville, because that's not really my interest. It's just simply to say that the sewer system is 34 years old or 35 years old. That is true. What people don't seem to follow is the fact that it's not the chronological age, but the condition that is more important. And for a couple of reasons, this plant, which is above ground, all steel, and so it can be refurbished in its entirety, which we've done 2/3 of it and have another third to go. So it can be refurbished, it can be refinished at fairly reasonable expense. So what basically I can say about the life of the plant is that it will exceed the life of the permit. And what I mean by that is we have nutrients which are going to have to be processed and treated going forward. And we've gotten an initial phase where we're doing some testing, but in 5 years or 3 years or whenever the permit is renewed, we might get 5, we might get 10 years in order to figure out how to treat the nutrients. Now this will require a substantial increase in the plant equipment at that time. So it could possibly require a new plant. But not necessarily. It could be some additional treatment that's added. So the condition of the plant right now is very good, actually. And what's interesting is a couple of years ago we were getting on with somebody trying to get them to not do so much grease in the system, and they turned us into DEQ with a complaint. So that yielded an immediate spot investigation, which we came up with no problems and a very good inspection. So it wasn't like the kind of inspection that you prepare for or study for 2 weeks. It was call one evening, we'll be there in the morning. And it did very well. Now, yes, there's some maintenance that needs to be done, but the life of the plant, the 10 or 15 years that I would say probably is what's going to end up being the permit life is there, and I don't think that certainly, in my opinion, is not a problem. And some maintenance would need to be done. Now, the other aspect of this is there are some properties, and I think there's a hot button property that may have triggered a lot of this discussion, which I'm not really going to take a position on. But I will say that development in or around Sperryville that can be done now under the current zoning, there are a number of parcels that don't necessarily have to be hooked up to the system. But for some economic reasons, it would be very desirable, probably, if that's all you're looking at, would be to hook these new users up instead of making them do drain fields, which would be about the same expense to them. But they could hook up, they could pay our connection fee, pay our user fees, and there is substantial capacity. Now, I won't assert 100, but it's substantial. And I think Matthew is correct, and Barbara, you said it too. It is a good idea to do an assessment, and I think that would be reasonable. I'm not sure, I don't know that there's any huge development planned, or even the ones I've potentially heard about aren't that big. So I think we have time. I think it's great to get all this information that you're talking about. But I do think to discount the plant as junk because it's 34 years old is not accurate. And so I think some of these conditions that we're making assumptions on should be tested for accuracy and reasonableness. That's basically my point. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, go for it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yoko Barsky. I live in Compton District. First of all, I'd like to thank the board and planning commission to have almost completed this huge task of coming up with a draft comprehensive plan. Should have been done long ago. Should have been done 3 times till now. And all the other commissioners somehow couldn't do it, but now it's completed. And I really I urge you to adopt this draft or maybe slightly amended version, because this 2020 version or this draft is so much better, and it includes a lot more updated items than the 2004 version. And now I see all the a lot of enthusiasm about the maps and a lot of other things that's included in this map. So in this plan. So now you can make this the basis, and then let's use this energy to work on the next revision, which should be coming up. But as a base, this is so much better than 2004. When you start to tweak on this, then it's going to take another year, 2, who knows? It's so much better to adopt now and then work on this basis. So thank you for the planning commission and the board, and I really urge you to adopt this. When there seems to be a lot of talk about the maps, but maps actually define all the writings, how they, like an old survey maps, okay, from this old tree, go 10 chains to the east, and then turn, it's that kind of description was in the 2004 comprehensive plan regarding the villages. But now it's somehow defined. Now you have the map, you can work from this and revise it for the next review. So I urge you to adopt it without delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoko. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Cynthia, if you have follow-up comments.
My problem with the current draft of the comprehensive plan is that it leaves out totally the people who want fiber to the home. It leaves out the dangers of wireless technology. And it seems to reiterate the propaganda everywhere. There's companies on all the reasons we can't object to it, all of this, all of that. And lost in there is the truth. And I feel there are some untruths in the plan, really based on ignorance. I actually did not rewrite the plan. I asked you guys to rewrite it, nobody did. But I gave you some amendments tonight that would incorporate the other side as well. We won't incur a lawsuit. We won't challenge what David said. It's basically small additions that say there are people who believe this. And this is the reason they believe it. And they need to be included in the comprehensive plan. And I know you haven't read it yet, haven't ingested it yet, but it is small changes. It's not rewriting. Much of the plan is fine. I don't know why we have columns and columns and columns about how to hide cell towers when hiding them does no good. It's the same cell tower. So, anyway, please read that. I hope it will be incorporated. I do feel I'm representing people like Ron Maxwell and Christopher's family, the Deacon's family, and some other people. So, thank you.
There's no one else that wishes to speak? Yes, Ms. Bruce.
On the sewer authority, I've done a fair amount of research and study of the engineering plans upon which the sewer was built. And I feel like, I talked at length with Alex, I understand where he's coming from, but I feel like if we had substantial growth in Sperryville, we would strain the existing system. I believe there are about 180 users or 180 taps, maybe 300 EDUs. The sewer authority is just that. It's like a little separate form of government. The Board of Supervisors does not tell it what to do. It raises its own money. It spends its own money. If it needs to fix something significant, it has to raise its own money. No Rappahannock County tax dollar will go to the sewer authority unless the Board of Supervisors should choose to participate. Our comprehensive plan seems to me is directing growth to Sperryville because the planners have said, well, that's where it should be because you have a sewer system. So if you put those two thoughts together, one, you won't pay for, you're not likely to pay for anything that we in Sperryville, 182 of us, are having to pay for. You're not likely to contribute anything to any extra costs that might occur there. And who's going to pay for it? The 182 of us who belong to the system, who are hooked up to it? Could we possibly have another Catlett situation? Catlett is having to rebuild theirs, and it's a $6.7 million project. I don't know if Fauquier County is going to kick in and help Catlett or not, but if we have to put $4 or $5 million into our system, would you all say the taxpayers of Rappahannock County would be willing to help me in Sperryville? So I think that we need to think about the Planning Commission, the comprehensive plan, directing growth to Sperryville when we have what I believe could be a critical issue with the sewer system. I also think there's sections in our comprehensive plan where you use the word encourage, encouraging growth, encouraging new development, encouraging development around these villages. And that's where you're using your maps. I think everywhere it says anything about encouraging development, you should delete from the comprehensive plan. Incidentally, when I think about the sewer system, it goes all the way up to what we call Hearthstone School. That's almost to the Shenandoah National Park. From there, the first mile of the sewer system comes through a 1 1/2 inch pipe. That's a pipe about this big. This serves about 1 mile, this size pipe serves about 1 mile of the first mile of the sewer system. This is smaller than the pipe in your kitchen sink. The next 9/10 of a mile is 2 inches. That is the size of a pipe in your sink. So the first 2 miles of the sewer system, first 1 1/2 inch, then 2 inch. As it gets closer to town, there's a 3 inch pipe. As it gets to the center of town and goes on down to the plant, it's a 4 inch pipe. So I think that we have general commercial zoning all the way up to Hearthstone School. That is a growth potential. I just think I'm worried about the sewer system, and I think that the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors should not encourage development around our village. You should ask the authority or encourage the authority to get the engineering study done. The only other thing is entirely different. This is the general commercial area. When you change that on the proposal, you just drew a straight line across from somewhere below the Atlantic Union Bank over to Rock Mills Road. It doesn't appear to follow any property line, a river, a road, or anything. So I think that will be difficult to manage because it is general commercial, and where does it go? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bruce. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? All right, with that, I'll declare the public comment period closed. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone tonight that I had envisioned this to be a joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission. And for reasons beyond my control, it was not noticed correctly. And so I have asked the chairman of the Planning Commission to be here since he was elected by that body to represent them and express any views on their behalf. I see Mr. Kohler is also here. Mr. Frazier is also on the Planning Commission. But just in the handoff of the document from one body to the other, that would seem to be in order. And if it pleases the other members of the board, I would ask the chairman of the Planning Commission if he has any comments to add.
I'm sorry.
I would like to ask the chairman of the Planning Commission if he has any additional comments.
I think this affects my hearing.
And mine too. I
What?
apologize.
Thank you.
Did you have anything to add, Mr. Connick?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to say a few things, and I guess I'm not sure how you're going to proceed on some of this, but I would like to address some of the comments that I've heard here tonight. The first thing that I would like to say is that it's very nice to see so many people that are engaged in it, have looked at it, and have made some thoughtful remarks and comments about it. And my only regret is that some of the bids that I see here tonight, but some of them and some of the comments they're making, I'm hearing for pretty much the first time, and it's unfortunate that they didn't come to the Planning Commission meetings and express these views, or just listen, because I think some of them have really are the victims of some disinformation or misunderstanding about what the comprehensive plan is and what it does and how it works and how it interacts with the zoning ordinance, and again the maps. So I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to address some of those what I think are misperceptions. First of all, I'm primarily going to focus on the maps, but I do want to address what Diane Bruce said about encouraging development. The language that's in the current comprehensive plan about encouraging or directing growth in and near the villages has been in there since the beginning. And as I appreciate it, and I haven't been around since the beginning, but near the beginning, when I was zoning administrator in the early 80s. And so that's about the time the first comprehensive plan was done. And that language has been in there because it's the corollary of preserving the most of the county in open space and for agricultural purposes. And so whatever growth we might experience should be focused around the villages, whether it's residential growth or commercial growth. And so that is, when using the word encourage, I don't think it means that the comprehensive plan is a device to try and draw in or promote growth and development. It's a statement that where we do have it, or we're going to have it, it should be planned and it should be focused around the villages first, so as not to disrupt the primarily agricultural character of the rest of the county. As far as the maps go, and pictures worth 1,000 words, and that's what's in the current plan, pictures. And I'm just flipping it open to Flint Hill, but if you go through it in the village section, you'll see that this is all that is in the current comprehensive plan. And it's not so much it's all that's in, it's terrible, because if you look at whether it's Flint Hill, or if you want to look at flip to the next one, Amosville. All there is this aerial map of the village. And as I have said, and some of you have heard it before, so I apologize for you hearing it again. Some of you haven't heard it apparently, and that is that, and look, I don't think it's a big secret, I'm a zoning lawyer and a litigator. And if I wanted to challenge this plan, and if I represented somebody that owned any property anywhere in this box, because of the fact that there isn't any map at all other than this aerial photograph, all this property and some of the zoning of some of that property is agriculture. And it encompasses an area that's way bigger than Amesville. I will come in and say, well, they don't have an actual map, but they do have that aerial photograph, and arguably that's the village. So when the plan says any growth should be centered or pushed in that direction, that's where it's going to be. One map I didn't show you is Woodville, and that's, to me, a very present concern, because if you look at the Woodville map, it's the same thing. It's a big aerial photograph of Woodville, and the box goes all the way out to the west. It includes some of the Lane property. It includes a lot of land out behind the Episcopal Cemetery, for those of you who know where that is. And arguably, they could come in and say, hey, we're right next. We have this agricultural property that's in that box of Woodville, and it's right next to village commercial that's zoned for 1 acre. So we want to zone that. We want to rezone that to 1 acre zoning. Or maybe there's an R2 category as well. And there's an R5. And so you could have literally hundreds of lots created based on the comp plan if you don't fix this problem. And that's how we got to the maps. That's how we got to the notion that in the future land use plan there's got to be some maps. The statute says you have to have maps. That's part of the comprehensive plan. We didn't have any maps of anything except some very general things. Well, the comprehensive plan now has not only the village map, it's got the scenic highway maps that we got from the Department of Highways. It's got a very detailed historic resources map of all the historic districts in the county, all the historic sites in the county that are recognized by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources are all on the map. So there's those maps. There's a map of prime agricultural soils. Some of that was in there. A lot of that's been updated. I think I'm missing one or two that we added just in this iteration in the last 6 or 8 months. So we put in a lot of maps. That's the guts of the plan. If you don't have any maps, you don't have much of a plan. Now, there's been a lot of talk about, well, if you include this or exclude that from the map, that affects our village and so forth and so on. And I appreciate a lot of the comments that you made, and Matthew, your comments were very nice and so forth. I really do appreciate what you're saying, but I think you've got a real misunderstanding of what the comp plan is and what those maps are for. The comp plan says now, and it said from the beginning, that we want to limit growth. We want to basically, we don't see, I don't have it right here, I'm not going to fumble around looking for it, but it basically says we don't see a need to expand growth anywhere. That the existing zoning categories and the existing areas that are quote unquote designated for growth, because that's the way they're zoned, is adequate for the next 5 years to accommodate any anticipated growth we might see. So for example, in Sperryville, you've got village residential, that's 1 acre zoning, not half acre like they have in the town of Washington. So it's a 1 acre minimum lot size. Then you've got some R5 around the village. Then you've got some village commercial, and then you've got this kind of aberration that no other place in the county has, and that's the highway commercial zone. The Planning Commission went back and forth 3 or 4 times to look at the highway commercial. Should we include part of it? Should we include all of it? And the consensus was, And, I think if some of you had been at those meetings, you see, it's not always so easy to get a consensus of 7 people to agree on anything. And this is what we finally agreed to, that we should include the whole highway commercial zone. We looked at maps, we had maps prepared by PD9 that didn't include any of the commercial zone. And everybody said, well, that's too small. That's not Spurrierville. The people down, at the barber shop, they're going to be excluded. They think they're in Spurrierville. And so it's very difficult when you start your own lines. I agree, but you have to appreciate we're not changing any zoning. We're saying these are the existing zones around Amosville. It's village commercial and village residential. That's the basis of the maps. The only exception is Spurrierville, where you have the highway commercial zone that stretches on, as somebody said, down to Hearthstone School, and it's also served by the sewer. And that's the only place where we included rural residential 5. I think there's 2 or 3 tracts that were proposed to be included because they are adjacent to the sewer system. It doesn't mean they're going to be rezoned. All it means is when you go to apply to rezone something, one of the considerations is it has to be compatible with what's in the comprehensive plan. So if it's not on the map in the comprehensive plan, that's a strike against you if you try to rezone it. But the comp plan doesn't rezone anything. Everybody's today, and if they pass it tonight, which I know they're not going to do, but if they did, tomorrow, nobody would have any more development rights to build one more house anywhere in the county because of this plan. They'd still, if they can't subdivide because they're in an R25 zone or an R5 zone, they're still going to have to rezone it to a more intensive use category. And when they do that, that's when they'll say, well, can the sewer really handle that? I don't know. And that's not part of the comp plan process. That's part of the zoning and rezoning process that comes later. So if landowner A, B, C, or D said, hey, look, I'm in the area in the comp plan map where I could rezone to R1 or village residential, so I'm going to apply to rezone it, then the planning commission would look at that property, and the board of supervisors after us would look at that property and say, well, first of all, does it meet the comprehensive plan in general? Because if the answer is no, then you're already on pretty thin ice. But after that, you have to look at the water table, the water usage, the sewer capacity. How's it going to affect the adjoining properties? How's it going to affect the value of adjoining the neighborhood? How's it going to affect the character of the neighborhood? And all those considerations, that's a rezoning. I don't think that we've had a rezoning except for the old the old mill, which was kind of incidental. But we haven't had a rezoning in this county, honestly, that I can remember. In 25 or 30 years, we had one rezoning application of like a major tract so that it could be developed. We just haven't had it, and that's because it's driven not by what's in the comp plan, it's driven by economics. And the economics basically aren't there. And when the economics are there, that's why what's in Woodville is a lot more at risk right now, because the property's up for sale. And if somebody buys it and wants to develop it, the question is, the comp plan and the zoning ordinance, a lot of people I heard making comments, and I've heard generally, oh, we should encourage this, or we should have a sentence about that. The comp plan is not like a vision statement of what you want to happen. It's a vision statement of what you don't want to happen. It's like we don't want this, and we don't want that. And if we have it or have to have it, this is where we want to see it go. So it's a restrictive document, not a facilitating document. It's not going to promote growth. It's going to retard growth. And the weaker it is, it promotes growth because there's nothing to block it. And some clever zoning lawyer from Fairfax or Manassas or Richmond or wherever is going to come up here and chew this up and spit it out in little pieces. Because I appreciate what you were saying. I've lived here since 1975, and I have seen what's happening to the county. And my goal as an individual and as on the planning commission and just as a citizen is to see this strengthened so that it is a better tool, and that's all it is, to restrict growth, not to promote it. But the Supreme Court of Virginia and all these cases, because guess what? The politicians are not in the pockets of people like Rappahannock. It's in the pockets of people who make money and develop property. And so there's all manner of cases and decisions that say if your restrictions are too restrictive and they don't permit any growth and they don't permit anything, then they're unreasonable and they're going to be thrown out. So you have to kind of thread that needle, and you can't be too overly restrictive, and you don't want to be overly permissive. And so I hope that answers some people's questions. Now, one thing that has come up about the wireless thing, and I'm going to be real brief on that, and that is I appreciate Cynthia Price's comments. I've heard it many times. The federal law and the state law say we cannot prohibit wireless and all those kind of facilities. The feds have taken it over and restricted us, and that is a factor that we have to deal with. The federal government is doing it, Richmond's doing it, even in this last session. Mr. Curry just sent me something a couple days ago, I don't think it's going to affect us, where the Richmond is taking away the local authority over zoning and planning, and they're saying, oh, you can't do this, like they've done with vineyards, and like they did with breweries, and like they've done now with agritourism, and various other things. They almost did it with the bed and breakfast and the Airbnb industry, where they're taking the authority of localities to control and limit what's in their own community, and saying, oh, you can't have any restrictions on that, if it meets this, and this condition. So, that's something we have to deal with. But as far as wireless goes, that's just out of our, I promise you that what is in there is the most restrictive thing that we can do and get away with it. Because if you go any further, well, I hear you say that, but you know, I am not a big proponent of it, but I studied this. I looked at some federal cases and state cases where the wireless companies went to battle with the counties, and what's in there now has stood the test of two different courts, state and federal. And so, you know, that's my general comments on it. I think it would be a tremendous mistake to take the maps out. I think it would be a tremendous mistake to water down the language that's in there. I mean, some of these tweaks and things like in the errata, they're fine. I don't really have a big objection to them, but on the whole, our existing 2004 comprehensive plan is so out of date that we are basically walking around with our pants down around our ankles, waiting, and the only thing that's saving us is the economy, or economic factors that make it uneconomic to develop Rappahannock County. But we can do a lot better, and I think this gets us there. It's not perfect. It's like what Benjamin Franklin said about the Constitution. It's not perfect, but it's good as we're going to get for now. The interesting thing, and then I'm going to sit down and shut up unless you ask me some specific questions, and that is this. You know, before I was put on the Planning Commission last January, the Planning Commission, I guess a year before that, voted to take things that a lot of the things, no maps, nothing about wireless and so forth, that's all been added. By the way, there's also becoming solar, that's been added. All that stuff wasn't in there. Everybody was ready to take it to public hearing and go forward with it with the argument, and Mr. Kohler standing right back here, he's the main one who made it, said, well, it's an iterative document, we can still work on it, we can change it later, we can fix this up and fix that up as we go along. And okay, now I'm making that argument. It's a lot better than it was when he said that, and what he said is still true. And all of you people, I encourage and invite you to keep engaged with it, to keep coming to the meetings, to help out. Because Lord knows we need help. We need people that with ideas, and you know, my view of it is the more the merrier. Everybody's got something to bring to the party. Everybody's got a point of view. We've got a county of 7,000 people, and most of the time, at planning commission meetings that we have, if we have 5 or 6 people, not counting the press people that are covering it, that's a lot. So it's delightful to see you all here, and I really do, I sincerely hope that you'll stay engaged in the process. And as it goes forward, it is not written in stone. It's going to be reviewed in 5 years or less. And during that time, there's nothing to stop amendments. And I agree that the maps and the villages and where they ought to be, the boundaries, is something that should be discussed. Great. But don't let a drive for the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think it would be a tremendous, tremendous mistake to let this linger and go on and on and on. It's been going on and on and on for at least 10 years when they first started 5 or 6 years late to do the updated draft, I think in 2010. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Connick, and I appreciate your staying around in case there are any follow-up questions. Anyone want to go first on the board in terms of discussion?
I could, since for the last 10 months I've been the board representative on the planning commission. I have to echo some of what Mr. Connick has said, and I guess I can disagree with him on one point. You can be wrong sometimes, you know, but I believe the planning commission...
But not tonight.
But the planning commission did reach consensus mostly every meeting on adjournment. So we were able to reach some consensus during all those meetings. But one thing I'd like to take issue with, and sometimes people say things, and I'm apt to do that probably more than most people, that aren't necessarily in your notes or something that you were going to say, which is one of those moments right now. But y'all have been duly represented on the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. We're your representatives. These are the elected representatives. The Planning Commission is appointed to be our body to weigh out some of these things and to, as we say, flesh them out and sometimes do the heavy lifting before it gets to us, especially with planning and zoning. So it's not fair to get up in a public meeting on the 11th hour and say that you haven't really been represented. You have been. And you can take issue with what I'm saying, and that's fine, but it's the truth. You have representation on the Planning Commission and on the Board of Supervisors. If you don't like it, I don't know what to say about that. But we've worked hard, we've been diligent. The maps that were approved by the Planning Commission to be recommended to the Board of Supervisors, it was a 5-2 vote. Mr. Henry and myself, we mostly wanted a little bit more area in the Amosville and Sperryville maps than what was proposed. I think Mr. Henry and I differed in the Flint Hill map. But that is the bulk of it. We try to do the heavy lifting. And what this board now needs to do is decide what it wants to do with the information that has been forwarded by the Planning Commission, what we've received since then, and what we may dig up on our own, or we can refer it back to the Planning Commission. But honestly, we've worked hard on this. There you have Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Any other thoughts, comments anyone wants to make at this point?
Go ahead. So, back when the first plan was written, there were all kind of country stores all over the county, and that's a place where people would gather, and the community, it's a community thing, it was convenience, and they've kind of dwindled. A lot of them have closed, half of them have closed, or more than half have closed, and I think that's a shame. And when I'd like to see 1 or 2 sentences in the comprehensive plan that would somehow open the door to encourage some zoning laws in the future that would make it easier for stores to reopen. I know that I'm on 231 a few years ago. That store wanted to reopen. It had been closed for over 2 years, so it wasn't allowed to reopen, and we had to come up with some kind of innovative kind of adaptive use in order to get it reopened. and it's a viable store. A lot of the community there really like it. There's a couple of stores in my neighborhood that have closed, and they every now and then one of the owners will say they're thinking about reopening it, but if they wait too long, they can't do that. So I would like to see 1 or 2 sentences in the comp plan that would allow us to make it easier for us to change the zoning a little bit on country stores where they don't, if they're not open for 2 years, they can reopen or just make it easier just to have it, because it is a real part of the community. It's where the newcomers and the locals get together and get to know each other, and the community gets there and exchanges ideas and gossip and whatever. So that's not really in the plan as per se. And I know why it's not, because it never was, because there were stores all over the place when they wrote the first plan. So anyway, that was one thought that I had. The maps, I have to admit, I don't quite understand all the concepts around the maps, but I'm instinctively adverse to putting a belt around a village. I think that as long as we have responsible planning commission, BCA, board of supervisors, people that want to do something that's near the village, and it requires a special exception or a special use permit, I would like to think that we can rely on the people that grant those things, have good sense. And so I'm not saying it's not a good idea. I'm saying I don't quite understand it. I'm not sure I just instinctively I'm opposed to putting a belt around a village. So we need to, I know that Mr. Curry's come up with some maps that are a little more vague, that they show what the zoning is currently, and that could be all we need for now. And like I say, once we get this process behind us, we will be able to move forward and tweak the zoning laws to take care of these things, because it is what it says it is. It's a plan. It's not, everything's not set in stone, because it's written here. And that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Did you want to say something? Or?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to revisit some of the things that were said at the last meeting and reiterated tonight. One is about maps. I was the Planning Commission representative from the Board of Supervisors last year. So I think one of the things that gets lost in people coming in and off commissions is that a lot of the work that was done this year on the Planning Commission was driven by the evaluation by Wiley Wilson of the thing that we had. Is Wiley Wilson or no? It's the Berkeley Group. Last fall, when we had a joint meeting with the Planning Commission at the high school, and there were basically 2 schools of thought at that time. One was that it was fine as it was and it should go forward, and the other was that we should go back and do more work on it so that it would meet the state, the requirements in the Code of Virginia. And so diligently, the Planning Commission did go back and work through the recommendations of the Berkeley Group. When I was the board's representative to the Planning Commission, we sat down early in the spring with Mr. Light as our chairman. It was in a work session, much less formal than this one. I bet Mr. Kohler remembers. And we all went around and we rated how much we thought we should go back to revisit the comp plan. So this was probably in March of 2019. I was the only member of that commission that wanted to go back and do the work and have meetings in the villages and engage the public and take more input because every other member of the commission felt that it had been done adequately in 2016, and it did not need to be engaged any further, and it was fine to move on. I was the only member of that commission that advocated for more education of all of the commissioners as we moved forward in the process of the comprehensive plan. Every other commissioner at that time thought we should just move on. I wanted to do a lot more work on the comp plan on my time on the commission. No other commissioner wanted to do it. As a result, when we got to the end of the process and we had the product evaluated by professionals, it was not up to par. And so we had to regroup and start back at square one and fill in what needed to be done. The work of the commission this year has been basically to work to the goals set out by the Berkeley group. What else did I want to say? The maps. The maps seem to have taken on a life where they are viewed as encouraging and including more and growth. To my mind, the maps are directing. It is not, you will do this here. It is, if you have an intention to do this, this would be the area that you would want to start to make a proposal to do it. It's not a free pass. It's not an automatic rezoning. It is directing what you may get in the future. It is preventative. It is excluding. And that is something that somehow seems to have gotten lost in translation. These maps are not to increase. These maps are a way to try to make sense of what's already going on largely. And as much as I might like to think that we could go around to each village and have us tell them what they think they are, at the end of the day, we have to have something legally to hang our hat on as a definition to hold everything together to where it would stand up in court if it were challenged. And that is why these maps look the way they do. Purely by chance, because I was in between a COVID briefing and a board of supervisors. How are we doing that night, Gary? I can't remember. In March, we were doing something, and I had some time to kill in between the two meetings, and I think it was a budget work session. And you all were having a work session here for the Planning Commission, and going back and forth between 3 or 4 versions of maps that Planning District 9, or Rappahannock Regional Commission, have been kind enough to draw up for us. When you looked at Amosville with certain inclusions, it was huge. It got excluded. That was a 4-3 vote. It's very tight votes as to whether it's more or less inclusive. Sperryville, without certain things being included, it's all chopped up. It doesn't make any sense. And, you know, when you get to the end of the process, you have to have a definition that you're not out on a limb if the zoning should, or the planning should be challenged. So I do think it's important that everyone bear in mind that this is not a rezoning document. This is a planning document. It is about intentions, directions, and planning. And I just want everyone to please keep that in mind. In terms of the revitalization that Ms. Haynes brought up, I mean, I've always envisioned that that is the next step after we get the comp plan finished. I've talked to several people about that over the years, including members of the last economic revitalization committee that we had. I think that product is probably 15 years old by now, but I've talked to some of the people that served on that and said, once the comp plan's done, doesn't it make sense to do this again? But until the comp plan's done, you don't really know what you're working with. But I do think that economic revitalization is the next step. That makes sense once the comp plan is complete. And we can easily impanel people to do it, just like we've done previously, and come up with a report for us. So there's that. That's all I have. And of course, as always, if you have comments or see things that you want added to the comp plan, by all means, feel free to contact me via email and send me the information. I probably submitted, how many, Michelle? 40 typos, mistakes, misspellings, things that needed to be capitalized, grammar errors to you over the past 2 years. And I thank you for your diligence in going back and correcting them. And so it pains me to tell you I missed a comma error on page 67. And at the bottom of page 67, there's the word and a comma that's just sort of hanging there. And so that needs to come out. And then I know Ms. Peterson had already mentioned the juxtaposition of compromise and comprise on page 63. If you could make sure that that change is made as well. I do intend to go to the next, I guess they're not having it next virtual, the next Water and Sewer Authority meeting and follow up on people's concerns. You're next.
I'm kind of embarrassed you were in the minutia and identifying commas that need to be fixed. I'm going to take a step back and look at the big picture. First of all, I just want to thank everyone on the Planning Commission. Mr. Frazier, I was eager to see you return to the Planning Commission, and I really appreciate your work. And Mr. Connick for pushing this through during a really difficult time and not being able to meet in person. And Mr. Kohler, Ms. Ishii, Mr. Henry, Mr. Light, and Mr. Schulin all have really worked hard, and that's clear. So I don't want my comments to take away from the hard work you put into it, but really to just put out some comments for consideration by our board. And I'm not saying these are things we must do. I think the document's close. I'm eager to get it done in a form that's acceptable to our board. One question I have for you, Mr. Connick, because I've been thinking the last few days about this. If you were to ascribe an adjective to this phrase, I'll give you a blank. Let me see where it is. The Rappahannock County Comprehensive Plan is intended as a blank document. What comes to mind?
Is this match game? I think they just brought this back.
No, but I'm just curious. Because I think we might be on the same page.
Well, I don't know that I could say one word that goes in the blank.
I read a lot of travels and attorney work on it. And I wish you would strive for fewer words.
But I would say it's a document that is a framework. It's like if you compare it to the legal system of the United States, it's something like the Constitution. It's sort of the general thing with certain limitations, and the specifics are left to the zoning ordinance, which hasn't been updated in a serious way since 1985 or 86, and the subdivision ordinance, which likewise has not been updated since 1988, I believe. So the comp plan like I said before, it's sort of a vision statement, but it's not so much of what you want to see, it's a vision statement of what you don't want to see. And it gives you the guidelines to go, and the implementing documents are those two, the zoning and subdivision. And I'll just say about it hasn't come up, it's sort of come up in a way. Our subdivision ordinance is so out of date that, I was away for a while, from about 1992 until 2002. And but I mean, it wasn't totally out of the picture. I kept up with what's going on. I don't think there has been a single subdivision proposed that came to the Planning Commission and then went to the Board of Supervisors for approval since 1988. Not one. Everything that's been approved and all the changes that have been made in Rappahannock County, including the Lyle Farm, my favorite example, have been done administratively because they fall under one or another exception to the subdivision. It's not really a subdivision if you do this, and if the lots are this size, and so forth and so on. If all the lots are more than 25 or 50 acres, like the Lyle Farm, they took 1,100 acres and turned it into a residential subdivision with no planning commission review and no board of supervisors review and no rezoning. And those are the things, I hear what you people are saying, but those are the things that really impact the character of our county. Because now where we used to have an 1,100 acre working farm with cows and animals and tractors and one main house and maybe a couple of tenant houses, we now have about 25 houses. And none of it's being used for farming, except some people make hay so they can be in land use. But it's not really a working farm. And you've all that have been around for a while, you've seen that everywhere, where gradually the county is being converted from a primarily agriculture-based county, like the comprehensive plan envisions, to kind of a gentleman, farmer, residential, retired people county, where farming is either a hobby or a tax write-off. But how many people in the county now are making money from farming, that make their living from farming? Chris Parrish is one, I guess. What?
Maybe 5.
Yeah, maybe. But when I came here in 1976 or 7, the whole Board of Supervisors were all farmers. Well, I mean real farmers, except for Clarence Baldwin. I think he had a store. One of the country stores. Well, this one right down here.
So
everybody else was, so that's a lot.
That's your final answer?
Sure.
Okay.
No, you're not going to ask me any essay questions.
I think you said
That was a fill in the blank.
we'll keep trying for pithiness. All right. So your word was framework. So it was a loaded question because the word, and you hinted at it. You used a metaphor I probably wouldn't hear. We're standing there with our pants down if we don't update this plan. So the word that comes to mind for me is protective. It is a protective document. And if it is, I don't know if you agree with that, but if it is a protective document, that's premised on the notion that we are protecting something. What are we protecting? We're protecting Rappahannock County the way we all know and love it. And so for me, it's when I look at the document, and I just counted, you did probably 25 substantive additions approximately throughout the document. I know that's a lot of work. I take a step back and I look at the document and I ask myself, does it as a whole present itself as a protective document? And I know it was the intro and all of the data and the economic section and geology and geography and all of that was written long ago. It's been updated to the best extent possible. But the document, when I take a step back and look at it, it feels like it's on its heels a little bit, because you don't get to the good stuff, the stuff that counts for all of us, until you get to the end. And I'm not saying this to undo your work or to be critical, but I'm just curious, was during your planning commission work sessions, was there a discussion about changing the order? For example, the goals are great. And if you look at Bath County, I've been looking at other counties in the Commonwealth, similar in size and geographic makeup, just to see how other people do it. If you look at the Bath County website, it says, we, the Board of Supervisors of Bath County, Virginia, hereby declare the following goals are at the heart of who we are as a county, and all the work we do will be in the spirit of these goals. So when I wade through all the stuff, it's all important, but I wade through all this stuff, and if I'm a developer, like, well, what's this county all about? I think it'd be great And it's not adding a lot of new language, it's just rearranging. Say up front, who are we? We believe Rappahannock County is a scenic county. We hold that in great value. Here are our goals. Why can't we start with that and say who we are? In your view, is there a downside risk to it? Should it be a passive document for some reason? Should we be backing into the stuff that counts?
Well,
10 words or less.
Wait.
you know,
They're gonna-
you're asking me, you know, if like to write an essay, like if I had a pony. But I don't have a pony, and I didn't have a pony. I got put on the planning commission in January this year.
I get that.
All right, and this document has been going around in circles, sometimes concentric circles, since 2010. And like I said about consensus, you know it, you're on the board. You don't just kick the door in and say, well, guess what, everybody? Now we're gonna take this and go, phew, and here's my new idea. I think what you're saying is great, and frankly, my own personal view, but you know that doesn't count most of the time, especially when you're chairman, because you're the one that's got to build the consensus. So a lot of times you don't have the freedom to say what you just said. I would take the first 5 chapters and put them in the appendix somewhere, because who cares?
Correct.
Who cares how many acres of whatever and all that detail? And the Manahoax used to have a trading post, which I fixed that typo because I had an apostrophe in Manahoax. And so for years, for like 30 years, it had that same typo. And every time I would bring it up, and they never changed it until finally I think Mr. Curry actually fixed it. But anyway, if I was starting from scratch, sure, I would write a totally different document, like what you're talking about, that would pretty much start with Chapter 6, which is the goals and principles.
Right.
And what I do want to say to you, and then my 10 words are almost up, is that Chapter 7 had nothing in it. It's the future, you know, the future, and the future statement with no maps and no detail was exactly word for word the same since 1980.
Right.
It hadn't been, not one word had been updated in the future. And so all those statistics and all that stuff, and that's what we have tried to do. And that's where the changes are about the future of wireless is in there, the future of solar, which Mr. Parrish is the one who initiated that really, and brought that subject up, all the counties around. A lot of things were put in there to add on to that, and yeah, in the next iteration, yeah, I would give serious consideration to what you're saying, because, you know, by the time you get to Chapter 6, if you're really reading it cover to cover, you're asleep.
Right.
I just want to give a kind of anecdote from my time on the Planning Commission about how difficult it was to make changes to the statistics that, for whatever reason, people are very attached to. We had a statistic on apple production in the county. It had not been updated since 1983, 1987. It was no longer tracked. It could not be updated. Our last statistic was 1987. I said, this is our hoarder's moment, folks. If we can't get rid of this table, we can't get rid of anything.
Right.
But I agree. There's two schools of thought, though, as to why bury the meat of the plan. One is, make people look for it. Don't tell them up front. Make them figure it out. Is that a smart strategy? I don't know. But that's what we've been doing so far. But that's the sort of attachment people have to the first few chapters. For reasons that I'm not really sure of, people are very attached to that information.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interject your comment period, but I just, believe me, we did go round and round with that on the Planning Commission during my time. Are we going to restructure it? Are we going to leave certain things out? Are we going to keep certain things in? And I would like a much leaner document, but this is the way it's always been and people like it like this.
You know, Mr. Whitson, I just want to, because
See, why did you do
Chairman said, is that?
Yeah.
Well, one second.
No, but I mean, this is what we need to talk about it.
The Berkeley group actually said that. And you know, the way these documents get written, most of the time, or when they started, suddenly the General Assembly came up with this idea that every county should have a comprehensive plan. And even today, a county must have a comprehensive plan, but zoning is optional. You don't have to have a zoning ordinance, but you have to have a comp plan. So that the VACO or whoever that association we belong to wrote a model plan. And we're still using the model plan with that exact structure and those exact tables, and you guys go in your county and fill in the blanks of the 1970s or 80s, and Berkeley said that. And they said, you know, they kind of looked at it, and I remember the guy, when he came to your joint meeting, I think you were there because you were a supervisor elected at the time, he kind of said, boy, we haven't seen one like this in quite a while. It was like an Edsel or something, where nobody was really using this format anymore, because there's an updated model comp plan, and the one that you've talked about is kind of what it's like. Just get to it. So,
And you know, I don't want to talk too much longer, and I apologize for already being long-winded. My favorite statistic that I used last fall at a candidate forum was in 1920, the population of Rappahannock County was 7,300 people, and then we went down in the 50s and 60s to like 5,000 people, and we've been growing ever since. And in 2020, we're back to where we were 100 years ago. That's our growth trajectory, and I just find it interesting that we're always talking about future growth as if it's inevitable, but I think that's a false presumption and a dangerous one. And if you look at Rappahannock County and where it's been the last 100 years, not a whole lot has changed, and I don't want to lose sight of that. And going into the maps, I get it. I understand logically this idea. Mr. Parrish called it a belt, or I told a citizen recently, the concept reminds me of like the Portland, Oregon urban growth boundary to prevent, the classic planning tool to prevent suburban sprawl. It also seems like a big world idea for a little community with 7,300 people. And I just wonder, and I'm open-minded here, I just wonder, the regional commission maps that have been put out here basically just reflect what you said, which is current zoning. Isn't that enough without establishing a boundary? And again, I understand the logic. I'm not against you by any stretch.
well, I just want some map. I don't want those aerial photographs to be conceived of as the map. And again, I go back, if I was challenging the ordinance in court, the thing that I would say is, well, the state law says the comprehensive plan, including maps, and they don't have any maps. Well, I mean, they got a road map and they got that map, but the villages, they don't have any maps for it, but they do have these, so I guess that's their map, Judge, and we're inside the frame. And so any kind of map that you make reflecting current zoning is going to be an improvement, and all it's going to do is set it. Can't think of words, but it goes together with the language, the verbiage that's in there that says that any future growth is going to be directed into that area with the villages. So you need something by way of a map to define what that is. And one of the problems, I'm just going to say quickly, of these revised maps is that it's got a lot of rural residential included in it. Not the ones that the Planning Commission, which were more restrictive. The ones that are on board docs for tonight's meeting are all inclusive of other than village residential and village commercial. It's got, we've got a zone in the county, or it's in the ordinance, of R1 and R2. But residential 1 and 2 acres. But to my knowledge, there's some R2 around. I don't think there's any R1 anywhere in the county. If there is, it's very like 1 or 2 lots. But the point is, by including R5, if you go to your zoning ordinance, which I wish everyone would do once in a while, in section 170-35, there's all the listing of the districts. And there's a description of what the district is supposed to be, which flows from the comprehensive plan. And the R5 district, it says that it's not the village. It says it's little collections, because that's how it got to be a zone. It's little sort of old subdivisions or clusters of subdivided places before there was zoning, but it's not part of a village. It's in the agriculture sort of areas of the county. Well, if you start to make changes like that without fixing the zoning ordinance, some other developer guy's going to come in and say, hey, you put R5 over here into your village, and we're just a little bit further down the road. What about our R5? Why can't we be in the village too? And that's exactly the problem that you get. And I mean, in a way I'm glad, in a way I'm not. I'm unhappy that it's caused so much controversy, but I'm very glad that it's focused everybody's attention on the zoning map. Because the zoning map, when we spent a year and a half, just like has gone in, as much time and effort went into the 1986 zoning ordinance as this comp plan, maybe more. And then suddenly somebody drew the maps. And nobody paid much attention to them. 3 or 4 people did them, and it all just got passed. And they really need to be revisited in a serious way.
Madam Chair, just 4 quick points, I promise, and then I'm done.
Well, it is a work session. We're supposed to talk to each other.
Yeah, so I did see some citizen comments on Chapter 2 pertaining to geology, climate, topography, watershed, water resources. I just received those, so I don't know what the process will be to review those, incorporate them, but I just want to mention it. I did sit on the Rappahannock County Water and Sewer Authority. Mr. Sharp, who I think has left, he's a friend of mine. I think a lot of what he says is accurate, but he was talking mostly about the health of the plant, and that ignores, I think, a big piece of the system, which is the collection system out there in the village, and it's porous, to say the least. So I don't, in my mind, having been on the authority for some period of time, I don't believe it's a strong system. So I do have some reservations about using that as a linchpin for a discussion about additional concentration of population or growth in the village. I just mentioned that in passing. Broadband Authority, obviously we're trying to take some forceful initiative in that regard, to, especially in light of all the COVID-19 stuff, the need for children and families and the elderly to have decent internet access. I just want to make sure that whatever we adopt in the way of a comprehensive plan does not preclude us from doing what we need to do for our citizens in that regard. And then a big question for me, I represent the Hampton voting district, which has the unique feature of having a town embedded within it. The town of Washington has its own comp plan. The mayor in recent weeks has mentioned in the newspaper a couple of times about the town's possible need for approaching the county for a boundary line adjustment to accommodate growth around the town of Washington. I want to make sure that the county comprehensive plan somehow addresses the town of Washington and speaks very clearly about where the town of Washington fits into the overall plan. I mean, there's some passing discussion, but increasingly town government is quite active. We saw in a newspaper article recently about the mill redevelopment. The town apparently cannot or will not extend sewer service outside of the town, and so that may put pressure on us from a county perspective to work with the town on some plans for boundary line adjustments. And I just want to make sure that we're thinking about what that means for our county. So I'll work on that, and I will try to get you some feedback quickly.
Maybe another way to do that would just be to get rid of the town and have the county run the sewer system, and then we have a problem.
Yeah, so that's really all I have. I really appreciate you allowing me to speak, and again, thank you to the Planning Commission for moving the document along. And I think we're getting there. It's close, so thanks very much.
And I just would say, if there are developing situations, I think it's wise to account for them, like it does toward the end regarding the affordable housing discussion and the study that's still going on with Rappahannock Regional Commission. That I think the appropriate thing to do is mention that there is work being done in passing and a deadline when to expect updates based on that work. And then, we can never wait for all the work on something to be done. It won't happen. So I think an acknowledgement of that sort is appropriate. And those sorts of deadlines will inform when we do need to revisit the comp plan, because that work will be done. Also, the results of the census will be in a couple of years, and there will be needed updates probably in 3 years from now. So I think it's critical to update it. I view it as a living document. I appreciate the hard work that the Planning Commission has done on it this year. Also, all of the people that feed information into it, the school board, everybody down from Fire and Rescue, the Park and Rec Authority. We made great pains to try to get updates to make sure that current situations were reflected accurately in the plan, which hadn't been done in a very long time. And I will touch base with the Water and Sewer Authority and sit on their next meeting and see if they are issuing a statement as well.
What will the process be? Our deadline is December 29th, so in terms of fixing typographic errors and providing narrative inserts or revisions, how are we going to do that?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think, and I wanted to discuss that a little bit this evening. I think it would be appropriate to hear, if nobody has any further comments on the board, maybe hear public comment, and then we'll talk about what I think we'll be having to deal with at the November meeting and the best layout for that, if that's agreeable to everyone. Okay.
If Mr. Parrish would want to say something, I have a couple comments, but I thought maybe let him say something.
No.
Well, first, Mr. Wilson, I appreciate the amount of time you put into your questions, but I'd like to caution you next time that it's been said that Mr. Connick takes longer to say something than a Allman Brothers song. I think it's...
Is that good or bad? Is that good or
I'm just putting that out there. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just bringing that point out. But I really feel bad that for whatever reason we didn't have this joint meeting with the Planning Commission members, especially since we're talking about not using the maps that were proposed by the Planning Commission. And I think really we should have one joint meeting where at least the Planning Commissioners can speak on the reasons that we came up with these maps. I think, again, we didn't reach consensus, or we weren't unanimous on 2 or 3 of them, but we were on the majority of them, especially the commercial district. And I think the map that the Planning Commission proposed for that should be used, and I think there's good reason for it. And there's really not good reason for this current map. As a matter of fact, and I don't know if I should say it, but I'm not exactly sure the Board of Supervisors actually adopted a map that looks like that. It may have just showed up some kind of way, and it's the only map that we have, so it was used. Kind of like what Ms. Smith was saying, that we just continually do things like we used to do. And sometimes there's reasons for that, but and I could tell a story about that, but then I would be guilty of exactly what I just accused. So I won't do that. I'm sorry?
We wouldn't want that.
No, but I've got a good story about that. And really, I think that this may fall under that we just keep doing this, and there's no good reason for this, and which may not have actually been ever officially approved. It just kind of wound up there. There's no good reason to have a commercial district line that goes halfway up that steep slope. It makes no sense at all. And what we proposed here, rule of thumb, and we haven't actually said that we would do that either, but rule of thumb, the reason that we can't really have any commercial development of our general commercial district is because there's no sewer system. And we've always said, kind of off to the side, different ones of us on the board and former county administrators, that if one of the sewer systems at the schools had to be redone, which they're probably at their life limit too, that we would develop a sewer system large enough to take in the commercial district. Because obviously, and it has been done everywhere else, if the town of Washington extends its sewer system out to the commercial district, everything along that route would then be developable at a very high density. Not exactly what you want to do by accident. That happened in the town of Culpeper when the farmer donated land for the Culpeper Hospital. The town built a sewer system out there, and I don't know that you could actually see where one part of town stops and the other part starts. It also happened in Warrington, where the one family donated land for the high school, the sewer plant, and the National Guard Armory, but they didn't take advantage of that. So they donated with the idea of helping the community and not really helping themselves. That's two alternative views. Same thing happened. So you may not want to push a sewer line from town out to the commercial district, but that's why this commercial district is not viable, because so much of the land is tied up in designated drain field or reserved drain field area. And there's no good reason to have that line way up on that hillside. That's why we proposed this map. So that was the reason for that map.
Well, I do want to, I guess, then speak about, if no one has anything else to add right now, what I would hope we could do at the November meeting, which is have the joint meeting that was originally hoped for this evening, but have a joint meeting at some point in November, if not at the regularly scheduled November meeting, then schedule a work session shortly thereafter in November, when it's agreeable to both bodies, and have a joint work session, because I do think when you live with a document for so long and you put so much work into it, there's been a physical handoff to the Board of Supervisors. But I think to really sit down with them and talk about the work that's behind it is the key to the process. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to do that tonight. So I'll follow up on that, and we'll get that scheduled. Hopefully the Planning Commission could give us some feedback after their meeting next week as to when.
The day after tomorrow.
Oh, the day after tomorrow.
If you want to do it on your regular November meeting, I don't know why you tell me.
Well,
Or tell me a couple of dates and I'll run it by you.
Yeah, I would say either the regular scheduled November meeting or
the
another
evening,
Monday. Yeah, in the
So
evening
that would
session.
be the 2nd
Correct.
at 7?
At 7 at the high school.
High school won't be available.
Elementary.
Oh, the elementary school, is that an option?
Possibly.
Okay. That would be the other thing to check, I would imagine. You don't mind. And if that's not an agreeable date for them to have a quorum, we can do it another time.
All right, well, I'll let you know.
Thank you, I appreciate that very much. Is there anything else anyone would like to add?
Madam Chair, I want to say how much I appreciate everyone coming out, and there are few things in our county that everyone really can rally around in a positive way. I think this has been a great discussion. Appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and personally, I feel privileged to be able to hear people and try to put thought into this and make it a good document, at least from where I sit. So thank you to everyone who came out tonight, and thank you for the opportunity to wrestle with this, and thanks again to the Planning Commission for their work.
Anything else? I would just agree that it is wonderful to see such a robust crowd. Second public comment period. Anyone that wishes to speak, please raise your hand, wait to be identified, stand and make your comments, and same rules apply. Please, I'm gonna let Mr. Connor, if you wouldn't mind sticking around for a moment, please, Ms. Butler.
I just have to say that what Ron said is so true. That's what the original plan was, is that the commercial property which my family owned, the septic system was to be built to include both schools. So it would be behind the elementary school, but they took the land and built another gym on it. But it was to include the commercial property. I'm very aware, I'm very knowledgeable of that. The reason it went up the mountain, my uncle owned it, part of it, right behind his place, you know where that was. But the rest of it went up the mountain because it was owned by that fella, and he wanted commercial property, Judge Sneed. And the reason apples, we need to keep apples in the statistics, because Diane, Tom, and I were raised on apples.
The way we can bring them back is through the agriculture numbers, but the way that they used to register them, they don't do it anymore. Anyone else wishing to speak? Matthew?
Just want to let you know I ate an apple on my drive over here. I want to say, I really appreciated your comments, and I found them really helpful, and actually, I agree with probably 98% of what you had said.
You should never say that at a public
But I probably lost 3 or 4 friends for saying that, no. But I would never agree with 100%, no matter what you said.
He can be wrong every now.
Yeah, yes.
That's what you said.
But this, getting back to maps, for me, the concept and the value of maps, I think, is pretty clear. They do serve a function. And I think you brought up an important one of just covering our rear ends in terms of being sued or looking inconsistent. So I think it's something that we have to be careful of in terms of a planning document, not to leave ourselves exposed legally. How we get there is a second issue. Also, with the idea of the map, I didn't have a problem so much using a map. It's really the rationale for how you came up with a map. And for me and maybe others, that was obscure. I didn't see what the rationale was. But and so it gets more complicated. I think with Sperryville, we talked about the sewer authority. Maybe it shouldn't be, and that gets back to kind of earlier points that I wouldn't be a slave to drawing a map just around the current sewer system. And I think more thought has to be given. And I think going back to a comment of the fidelity between this and the zoning, I think is really critical. And I think that there's a possible solution in here where the map begins to look like the zoning map. There's a zoning, like a zoning gradient where, I could think, at least in my concept, in the town, that's where you have 1 acre lots, smaller lots, and then they get bigger as you go out and until everything's 25 acres or more, except for exceptions. And I was wondering if there's a way to come up with maps that reflect the current zoning. And of course, if we thought if there was a mismatch, maybe that's a cause for some inquiry and say, well, why isn't? Maybe we should go back and look at the zoning or maybe rethink our maps. But I would think defining villages in a way is kind of an organic concept where we've already said that villages, we cluster, we have smaller lots, and then they get a little bit bigger, and then finally there's a transition zone, and you're now in the hinterland. So I'm wondering too if the plan might make reference to the fact that our concept, our definition of a village, where we would want to cluster more development, is really reflected in how we zone the land. that we permit smaller lots in these particular areas, and thus what we call villages. And so we get away from that, like the aerial maps, which are potentially dangerous, but if it's rooted a little bit more toward zoning, then we can point to something.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, Ms. Tom.
I learned a lot tonight too. Life is full of challenges, and I appreciate what I learned from you. And Christine, I wanted to say I'm really sorry you didn't have another vote to get your town.
Me too, Barbara.
I think that would have solved some of the issues. And even though Gary's office is, I said, I'm trying to zero in to see the details of where these lines are for these maps. I thought we could blow it up and see what was where. And I think explanatory meetings, maybe it's not too late for us to do that anyway. Get some real information on what the lines are in the maps. There might be really good reasons for it. But I couldn't find it as I was poking around on my computer and that was really good anyway. So I thank everybody for the work, and I think we just need to keep working really hard to try and understand what makes this a process that will keep enriching our villages.
Very good. Thank you so much. Anyone else wishing to speak? Well, I try to get to everybody once before I let somebody come back for seconds. Yes, Cynthia.
I have to say I'm dismayed. The reason people who are against wireless technology are not showing up at these meetings is that they became so discouraged. They became so discouraged. I mean, I can go out and talk to them and they don't want to come because they think it's futile. They think there is nobody who's done the self-education, who understands it, not on the broadband committee, not chosen for the broadband committee, not on the planning commission, not David, not here. Certainly David believes the main downside to wireless is it's ugly, so you hide it. That's the least of the problems. There are ways not to invite in toxic technology and still not incur a lawsuit. It can be discouraged. Where I take issue with you, Kier, is that you think we
Please
should
direct your comments to the board, not to to the board, not to board members.
Thank you for your politeness, Christine.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Where I take issue with what was said, and I can't say his name, is that it attempts to conform your future actions to the COVID virus, and I think that's a mistake. If we plan that this is going to go endlessly, we're going to have to live this way. We lose our county. And I think it's a mistake to go full speed ahead with the CARES money and everything else to bring in wireless, because in my opinion, what differentiates us from Culpeper, Warrington, Madison, Fauquier is the technology. Is that we have less here. We have cleaner air here. There's nothing that says we all have to be on a cell phone or that we all have to have broadband by wireless emitting from our electric lines or by 5G. We can have it safe. We can have it with fiber optics cables. We can have safe telephones. They don't have to be cell phones. I know that's not politically correct, but it is toxic. It is toxic, and it's a mistake to think you can bring in cell towers and just get rid of them. You can bring in stuff on the electric lines and just get rid of them. We're going to end up like the neighboring counties, and we are so far less developed than them, and that is a positive. That's why people come here. We start slapping this stuff up, and we don't even consider anymore the alternatives that are better and less polluting. We're going to lose county. We're going to become another Culpeper. So I think that's a mistake, and I'm very disappointed that, I mean, I've been giving information and testifying for 8 years about this, and it's like nobody's home. Nobody's home. I know a lot of people who are aware of it, in this county and out of this county, but they don't sit on the boards. I'm sorry to say, I don't question your intent. I think you're good people, but I think it's the wrong direction for the wrong reasons. And I think we have choices, and we have ways to discourage certain technology and encourage other technology that's legal and it's a lot safer and better. For example, in the library, we have fiber. It's not hard to hardwire the library computers to fiber. It's easy. But the library uses the fiber to back up wireless routers. So the library is full of radiation for little children, for everybody else. It doesn't have to be. There are choices. It's a matter of some self-education, and it's not from the television screen. It's not, unfortunately, we've got more and more censorship on the internet, but it is not from the television screen. So I just want to say that, and that's where I differ with David.
Thank you, Cynthia. There's one hand in the back.
Page Glen, Jackson District. I would first like to commend the board for one of the more productive meetings we've had in quite a while. I think that was made more productive because you had a very knowledgeable subject matter expert with you here today. The last one that was like this was the joint meeting you had on the building committee. I thought that was a productive meeting. There's a trend here. Working sessions, not formal, all the other stuff, board meetings, seem to be a whole lot more productive. What I would like you to do is have these weekly, if not every other week, and cover perhaps the life and safety issues of the building committee, like this little theater over here that still hasn't been done 2 months after we talked about it, or the numbers that the fire levy board needs or you need to address the fire and rescue staff. Those need to be separate work sessions. They need to happen now. Fire levy board can work until it's blue in the face, but we don't have the authority to move. We've had an emergency services coordinator, what, 2.5 months now since he put in his resignation. We don't even have a position description on more or less an advertisement on the street. We don't have numbers for what our actual responses are, so we can't make an informed decision. There's a whole lot of issues on fire and rescue that we need your authority, working in a work session with the chiefs, your subject matter experts, and get this stuff straightened out. The comprehensive plan is very important, but these other two are life and safety issues. If you don't do something soon, I hate to say it, someone could die because of your inaction. Please have work sessions on these other subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Yes, Ms. Green.
Just addressing a comment I heard a few minutes ago about, I think this was Ron, the sewer system and the general commercial area. I don't feel like it's the county's responsibility to put a sewer system in there to accommodate the general commercial area. If somebody wants to come and build something in the general commercial area, let them put their own sewer system in. Let them put, but why should the county go to the expense, build a sewer system to bring commercial activity? Talking about Carolyn, talking about Tom and Carolyn and me and farms and apples. Yeah, we were a big apple production area years and years and years ago. But Rappahannock County has never had the kind of land where you could have large farms. It's too hilly, it's too rocky. You can't, it's not like southern Fauquier County and Culpeper County where there's a lot of flat land. And so as things have progressed and changed over the years, it's the larger operations that have the business. It's not the smaller ones. The smaller ones can't afford to do it anymore. So you can bemoan the fact that we don't have all of these farms that we used to have, but it is not profitable for small farms to make a living anymore. That's just a fact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Oh, yes, Ms. Varsky.
Thank you. I think I might have missed the timing a little bit, but I thank you, Ron, for explaining about the commercial plan, how it came about. I've been bringing up about the strangeness of the commercial area plan for over past 5 years or so. Finally, this planning commission took it up, and so I'm really, much happier than I was. We still need a little bit of tweaking, but just to compare the actual general commercial zoning and the map itself. And the same thing can be said about this identification of the villages. Sperryville is a little different, but if you take up on Amesville, what's identified in the planning commission plan as village is the village commercial and the village residential put together, right? So it makes sense. Both were identified as village in zoning. Sperryville, unfortunately, is a little different. But so that's what identifies at the little space. What is proposed, the replacement maps identifies actual zoning. Yes, we do need that kind of map, but that's a zoning map, and that should be together with the zoning ordinance, not with a comprehensive plan. And I hope you get around to do the whole county's zoning map, much more detailed. So Barbara will be able to find her house in that particular zoning. And that does not belong to a comprehensive plan. So that's just my thought.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak? No one else wishes to speak. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish, and a second.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Fraser, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No one's ever opposed.